All right, welcome everybody to the December 18th, 2017 meeting of Kubernetes SIG Service Catalog. Aaron's going to execute the agenda today. Take it away, Aaron.
Thanks. All right. So we're going to do speaker queue. You guys are familiar with it. I have my new high-tech equipment. It has lines this time. Pretty fancy. So who's ready to get started?
Woo.
Yeah. All right. We're going to start. Yeah. All right.
Hell was that?
That was Paul's inner Viking coming out. It's pretty rad. Thank you, Paul. We are going to start with Jonathan has the kubectl plugin demo. Jonathan, go ahead, take it away.
Okay, so this is just an update on the kubectl plugins I've been working on. Can you see the Ubuntu terminal?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So I've opened a PR for this near the end of last week. This is just a demonstration of what I have so far. So I've decomposed the plugins. I showed last time, I think I had individual like create service broker was a single command. So I've decomposed that into, I have a plugin for each abstraction, each resource now. And so far for all of these, I've implemented list and get. Also, sort of an aside, I've been working sort of with the CLI SIG, sort of the back half of this plugin, been turning it into a library for generic plugin use. So I have a PR open against the CLI's kube control repo as well. And the benefit of this is once that's accepted and I can merge these plugins over to using that one, it should be much quicker to get things up and running. So I have list and get implemented so far, but it would be pretty easy just to add, the rest of CRUD or relist brokers or, whatever you care to do. So I have a couple brokers running on my Kubernetes, so I'm just going to go ahead and list those. So I have one called fake services. Oh, well, looks like there's a bug. Okay, well, so there's two listed. And then you can see the classes are listed, and I didn't actually go through and instantiate any of these, so that's as far as this goes. I didn't actually create any instances. Yeah, so this is just sort of a demonstration of what I have working so far. Are we interested in continuing to pursue this? Is this something we like? Thoughts, discussions?
Sorry.
Paul's got his hand up. Go ahead, Paul.
Were you going to show the commands that you implemented for provisioning a service instance or binding?
So I haven't done those yet. I've only implemented list and get. We had a couple of us had a meeting a week or two ago where we discussed what an MVP of the plugins we wanted, and we arrived at list and get for the 5 abstractions. So I haven't done create yet.
Okay.
It would be, like I said, I could get that up and running in a day if that's something we're interested in seeing, because I've spent a lot of time getting the framework where I wanted it on the back end. So.
Can you show what they would look?
I think that get and list are things that we should try to make kubectl do. I think that projects that want to prototype, like what you want to see the output from list and get to be, are useful to try to figure out where do we want to aim. But like the plugin mechanism, as far as I know, is not supposed to allow you to override get and list. So I was trying to see if Fabiano and Franz could join us. Have you been in touch with him at all?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay. I'm definitely interested from a plugin standpoint for things like create an instance and create a binding. My own opinion is that for list and get, we should try to fix kubectl in general so that we don't have to have plugins proliferate in the community instead of just like fixing list and get.
All right.
Yeah.
Was that everything, Paul?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Doug, you just put your hand down, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't need to ask my
Okay.
question anymore. Thanks.
All right, I have Carolyn up next. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, I was just hoping to see example of like seeing all the plans are associated with the class or anything like that, because you said you did implement Git.
So I have them what broker they're connected to at the moment. I could add what class they're from.
So you can't like query or filter right now.
No,
Okay.
only by name of the plan. I could add, get all the plans for this class or whatever.
No, I was just curious, like what the plugin lets you do. Like, can you just put anything you want after kubectl plugin and then go wild, or
No,
is
no,
there
no,
like
no.
are you stuck with a structure?
So in terms of the plugin framework for kubectl, you can add pretty much anything, because the way it works is you write your own binary and the CLI passes control to your binary.
Mm-hmm.
So I've written 5 binaries, one for interacting with each of the abstractions. So and currently I have list and get for those 5 abstractions. So if you wanted to be able to filter things, I could add a flag to plan list by class and then pass it in a class name.
Oh, okay.
But I would have to add that. And I could do that if that's something we want. It would be pretty easy at this point.
Okay, so if you wanted to add relist or sync, it would be a new binary?
No. It would be a new feature. So I don't have a relist yet.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to, I would just add it like this. It would just be a new subcommand of the broker plugin.
Oh, okay. Cool. Sorry, I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to see a little bit more what your plugin does. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Doug, you changed your mind, looks like. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so Jonathan, can you rerun the plan list again just for a sec? I got a question on that.
You're talking about the output? I realize the output is broken.
What's broken about it?
It prints the thing twice. It's only supposed to... It's printing it every time it adds a new thing to the list, which it shouldn't be doing. I got to fix the table printer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not worried about that. But the fact that you show the UUID instead of the human readable name, I'm assuming that's just because you haven't gotten around to showing the human readable name, right?
So no, that actually is the human readable name. My plans are just dumb and don't have human readable names.
Oh, okay.
Because those are automatically generated plans from the UPS broker and my fake broker.
Okay, so
that is the external name, though.
Okay, so all the service brokers, or sorry, the service classes, the plans, all the ones that have a human readable name would actually show up there. You just don't happen to use that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool. Other questions, comments, etc.?
Yeah, so I think this is valuable to have plugins. I think the best way to invest your effort on this would be for things like relist, create a new instance, and create a binding. That would be my suggestion for if you're trying to figure out what to do next.
So my next plan, oh, sorry.
That was it.
Okay. My next plans, if this is something we're interested in doing, would probably be adding create and delete for these 5 abstractions. And yeah, I could do relist because I actually already have most of the code because I sort of partially implemented that under the old way I was writing them. So that would be where I'd be taking this the next step if this is something we're interested in continuing.
Yeah, I don't think we need a delete since we already have kubectl delete, but I definitely think there's value in command that would be create service instance or create service binding. That you don't have to write YAML, you can just say, this is what I want to make an instance of, this is what I want to bind to. That I think has a lot of value. Does that make sense?
Sure.
All right. Moving on to the next one. We've got Marco. Marco, welcome. We've got you demoing custom columns. You want to take it away?
Hey guys, yeah. Okay, let me try to share my. You need to stop sharing and then I can share.
How do I, this button? How do I stop sharing?
Usually it's near the top of the screen. There's a little thing that hangs down.
Go for it.
Okay. Let's see. Can you guys see the left part?
A little small. Can you make it a little bigger?
So do you want me to just increase the font size or?
Yeah, that works. Thank you very much.
Okay. So basically what I did was I added an extension to the OpenAPI schema. It's the OpenAPI-gen equals x Kubernetes print columns, and that then exposes the columns to kubectl, which allows me to then do this cluster service brokers. And it shows the columns by default. You don't need any other switches or anything. You can also do the same for service classes. It's a bit slow because of the Zoom hogging up my CPU in the plans. And of course, I didn't create that. Create this instance. Service. Oh, interesting. Oh, looks like the API server crashed or something. Yeah. Oh well. So this, the main problem with enabling the OpenAPI schema or exposing it in the service catalog API server is that it then broke creating service catalog resources because the schema was incorrect, and also there was a bunch of problems in the core API server. For instance, the aggregator, which was aggregating the OpenAPI schemas from the core and from the service catalog API server, did not produce good enough schema. It duplicated some entries and it didn't update the references properly. So I also had to fix that. And there was no proper support for raw extension, which is used in service instances for parameters, right? So I've also had to fix that, and then breaks the kubectl itself. So I also had to fix that. So there's a bunch of PRs open which need to get merged before this can be usable. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool.
So Marco,
We got Doug up next. Go ahead, Doug.
So Marco, you mentioned that you added new columns to the OpenAPI schema. Just a couple of questions on how that works. Do those columns automatically get spit out by kubectl, or do you have to explicitly tell kubectl to include those columns on the
No,
Git?
as soon as the OpenAPI schema includes the custom columns extension, kubectl displays them by default from 1.9.0, I think. But in 1.8.0, you'd have to enable it through a switch.
Interesting. And one other question. Through that same mechanism, are you able to control what columns do not appear? So for example, if you did not want to show the name column, can you control that, or is that not part of the feature?
If you want custom columns, if you want to specify them with kubectl itself, then you use the regular kubectl get resource -o custom -columns equals, and then you list them. You can't remove a single column. As far as
Okay, so from the server side perspective, you can only add new columns. You can't control what the default columns are. Is that right?
No, you specify all the columns you want shown. You do not only add them, you need to specify all of them.
No,
In
what I mean is you modified the OpenAPI schema on the server side, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to add new columns automatically. But on the server side, can you control what columns are not shown?
I didn't hear the last word.
From the server side, can you control what columns are shown from the default set of columns? So for example, can you make a server side change so that name never shows up?
Well, yeah, because that's in the OpenAPI schema, which is served by the Service Catalog API server. Because by default, there were only two columns, name and age, I believe.
Oh, I got it. Okay, thank you. I was confused. Okay, thank you.
I mean, if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the annotation which defines the columns. So this is it. So this is basically the custom columns which you would usually specify when running kubectl-o custom columns, right?
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So that's all I have.
Cool. Paul, you're up next. Go ahead.
So Marco, I think it might be interesting and instructional if you could like hit the discovery endpoint and show us the open API that the API server was showing. It sounds like maybe you had a crash on your end, but I wonder if you have an example.
Yeah. So cluster service broker. So this is the aggregated open API schema from both the core API server and the service catalog. Oops, really slow. Yeah, so these are the endpoints, and then below there are the definitions somewhere. Should be somewhere around here. Yeah, so this is the definition of the cluster service broker. And I like
Okay. Where did the annotations for the columns wind up going?
Oh, the annotations are here. So it's an extension just below the definition of cluster service broker, for instance.
Interesting. So you have you are showing stuff that you already have pull requests out for, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Those are all of my questions.
Cool. Other questions, comments for this, for Marco? All right, going once. Okay, Doug, you're up next to discuss the cluster ID pull request. Can you also tell us what pull request number that is?
Actually, Morgan, do you have the PR number or URL you can paste into the chat? And actually, Morgan, through Slack, you had mentioned, actually, wait, okay, yeah, you are there. Morgan, you had mentioned there were some topics you wanted to discuss that seemed to have vanished from the agenda. Did you want to discuss yours for the one thing I had on my list?
Well, if people just want to delete my stuff, no.
We also have another demo for a CLI. What do people think about getting the last CLI demo out there before we start talking about other things?
Anyone opposed to that?
It's fine.
All right. Let me paste the PR into the agenda real quick so we have it. And we've got Carolyn with a demo of the SVCat CLI. So Carolyn, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So SVCat is the name of the binary, and it's kind of this domain-specific tool for interacting with the catalog. So you can say get brokers, and it'll show me what's installed. Everything has like get describe. It kind of works a lot like kubectl. And so describe broker. So I can see everything about it, like when it last fetched from the catalog, and then I can get, say, the classes. And so I have an instance using MySQL here, so I can do svcat. Let's do like describe class, my Azure DB. So it gives me all the standard info, its status, and then what plans are on it. And then if I want to take a look at some of my instances, I've got a quick start here using WordPress. So I can say svcat, describe, instance, and I can see, if I do -t, it shows me a whole bunch of information up and down the hierarchy. So I can see, you know, the name, the namespace, stuff like that, what class it came from, the plan, and the broker as well. Or if I want to look at like who is using a particular plan, I can do svcat, describe plan standard. And then I can see like, okay, I have 2 instances of this on my cluster. So that's the tool. I don't have a provision or anything like that yet. One other command that we have is a sync. So it can update and relist essentially. So that's it.
All right. Looks like Doug. Go ahead, Doug.
There's a really bad echo. Paul, maybe you can mute. I think it's coming from your side. I was wondering if someone, maybe, I don't know if it's Carolyn, Jonathan, or Aaron, can talk about the possible harmonization that's going on here between the plugins stuff that Jonathan was working on and the Microsoft Service Cat tool.
Yeah, I am happy to. I'll make this quick because I apologize I didn't put my hand up. We talked with Phil Ritrock at KubeCon. He laid out a nice plan for Jonathan and I and Carolyn and others, whoever's building a CLI, to merge some kind of common functionality, little and big, up to Kubernetes, kubectl, the repo. And he wants to aggregate it there, kind of clean it up, and eventually he would like to swap out some of that common functionality in kubectl with this common functionality in the kubectl repo.
So when that shared library stuff is ready, is Service Cat going to go away in favor of the plugins, or are they both going to live on? What's the anticipation there?
Sorry, what was the question?
When the shared library is completed, do we see the Service Cat stuff going away in favor of the plugins going away in favor of Service Cat? Are they both going to live on? What's the future going to look like?
I can't really speak to the plugins. From Fabiano and Phil, both of them have kind of differing opinions on what plugins should be, what the future plugins are. SVCat's going to stick around though until there's a really good story for both reading and mutating operations in core kubectl, if that actually, you know, if that's going to happen or not.
Okay.
It looks to me like we have potentially very useful bits in different places. I think there will be, like, it will make sense, like in a vacuum in the Kubernetes ecosystem, that different projects will want to have different plugins, and maybe vendors will want to differentiate certain things with plugins, but I do think that it would be best for everybody if the things that we agree on can be in like a vendor neutral area. So for example, not to pick on you, Microsoft folks, but there are probably some vendors that would not want to ship something that came from like a Microsoft repository, and I don't even know if it's in a Microsoft repository, but like just having a vendor association might make some like vendors uncomfortable, some other vendors uncomfortable about shipping X or Y thing. So, and I think it would be awesome if we could put together like a baseline plugin or set of plugins that had common things with a good UX. So I think everything that I've seen here today is really interesting, and I'm glad that people have been prototyping in the space, and I hope that we can work together to have something that's like a base plugin that's just part of service catalog repo that you can install that gives you a good CLI experience around things that maybe that are just like intrinsically not easy. I do think that we should make kubectl go as far as we can get it to go. So I'm actually pretty pleased that the OpenAPI columns are turned on by default in Kube 1.9, kubectl from 1.9, because that switch to enable them is pretty big and hairy. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks everybody that showed demos today.
Cool. Jonathan, you are up next. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, so I haven't gotten this to work on Windows yet. I am not too familiar with Windows CLI stuff. If someone who is familiar with that could reach out to me, I'd really appreciate it. I have a couple questions.
I can help.
Sure. I guess I'll
Cool.
ping you up to the meeting. Is that fine?
Yep.
Cool. I have my hand up. I'll be quick. So yeah, we built this. It's in the Azure repo. Happy to donate it upstream if people are interested. That was always our plan, and we were always willing to do it. I don't think, this is my controversial part, I don't think kubectl plugins are the right place for any of this functionality because this is domain specific. That's why we built it as a separate CLI in the first place. I also don't think that kubectl plugins are ready at all for user consumption. Everything from the user experience to install, even through to the fact that you have to type kubectl plugin X, kubectl plugin Y. None of it feels right, and none of it is right, in my opinion, to do anything simple or complex on Service Catalog. That's it for me. Any other comments, questions? I hate Aaron, reactions, etc.
I don't disagree with you. I think that we can probably try to do both, right? Like having CLIs that we have reasons that we can say like, you know, X or Y thing wouldn't be possible to implement in a plugin right now is probably good feedback to drive plugins to a point where like where you would want to use them. So I think that like I just want to be super clear. I'm not trying to say that like any project is wrong. I want to make sure that we feed information back in where it would be useful for people to be like, oh, well, hey, this is a thing that like people actually really want to do with plugins. We should think about how to facilitate that. And it looks like there's a hand up, so I will stop talking.
No,
All right, go ahead, Mikkel.
Yes, Michael, I'm new here. Sorry if I got up on all your issues here. I had a separate kind of issue question I wanted to ask. So I like the work I'm seeing here. I'm just curious if there's thoughts on access control. Like right now, it looks like if I have Service Cat, I can do whatever I want to, whoever I want.
So I assume that's kind of in the cards in the future. I'm just asking.
So that was a topic of discussion at the recent face-to-face in Raleigh. Yes, the short answer is yes. We want to have RBAC policies or another mechanism that will restrict the services and plans that you can see as well as use. The TLDR of the challenge there is that it's very easy to write an RBAC rule and add code to the controller about checking to see whether you have the ability to, for example, provision a particular service or plan. It's not easy to implement a list filtering using RBAC or some other ACL. So that is the great unsolved problem in that area. But yes, that is something that everybody is very interested in, and that hopefully will be part of release as soon as possible, because my product managers at Red Hat want it super bad. A lot of other people want it super bad. If you have any ideas, I can spend a moment now getting the issues together. And actually, I seem to recall that you may have commented on one of them. Do you need pointers to issues?
Yeah, that would be fine if you could. It'd help me.
Okay. Thank you for coming to this meeting.
Yeah. I'm new. I'm sorry I work for Samsung SDS, and so I've kind of been tasked to jump in here a little bit. So.
All right. Happy to have you, Michael. Next up is Doug about the cluster ID PR. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so Morgan, I couldn't hear you before when I asked the question. Were there some topics you wanted to discuss before I asked the one question I had?
Not if people just want to randomly delete my stuff. It's,
Moving forward, Morgan, are there specific topics you want to discuss?
Later.
Okay. So Paul, you had asked a question on the PR that talked about, do we need a whole nother API set as opposed to just creating a map or something like that, right?
Yes. I am not clear on what requires a new API resource for this.
Right. Morgan, maybe you could address that because I think you have the history there.
So Doug, I think that probably nobody else on this call knows what we're talking about.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I apologize. So the issue here is, let's see, where to begin? Okay, so when Kubernetes talks to a service broker, it includes in the API request a little chunk of JSON called context, which includes information about the platform that's making the call. For example, in the Cloud Foundry world, it includes the organ space. In the Kubernetes world, it's going to include the namespace related to, for example, where the secrets are going to get created when you're doing a binding, stuff like that. As part of that information, we need to include a cluster ID, just some unique identifier that says which Kubernetes cluster this request is for, because there are some use cases where the entity making the request to the broker actually spans multiple Kubernetes clusters. And so we need some unique way of knowing, or the broker needs some unique way of knowing for this particular platform that's making the call, which specific cluster it's talking about. So that's why we need this cluster ID. And even though cluster ID seems like a pretty generic thing for Kubernetes, in all the discussions that we had with the core team, I think API server or SIG architecture, I can't remember all the different places that Morgan talked to, they couldn't agree on where it should live, what it should mean in terms of, what does the what does the UUID represent? And they just couldn't come to a solid agreement on it. So they finally kind of punted and said, since right now Service Catalog is the only one that really needs this, even though that isn't technically true, that's what they said. They said, go ahead and create it in Service Catalog and make it specific to your guys' stuff. And if at some point in the future we want to resurrect this as a global thing, we'll do that. So that's why Morgan is working on this PR in our stuff as opposed to core Kubernetes. Does that summarize it, Morgan?
Yep.
Okay. So anyway, as part of Morgan's PR, he created a new, what's the right phrase here, API group? Is that the right phrase for it?
No, it's in the same group. It's just a new type.
A new type, okay. Yeah, so you create a new type to hold this information. I don't know, more maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more about what the new type is?
It contains an ID, and that's it. And I tried to enforce some validation of its behavior. And
Paul,
I wrote a controller to create it. And that's it.
Okay, so now maybe Paul, you can ask your question to the more in context.
Yeah. So my question is like, and I've actually suggested in the past when this came up that it might be a good way to prototype to add like a config map or a CLI flag for the controller. And it's just not clear to me what the API resource buys us, especially given that it seems likely that eventually there will be some first-class notion of this that will be in conflict with.
So Morgan, do you have an answer to that one?
It's everything that you just said, which is, nobody wants to take ownership of it. So this is the way we're going about it. If there's some other way you want to do it, we can do it that way, but this is the way I did it.
So Paul, when you say create a config map, do you mean add a config map property to an existing resource in our model, or create another type that has nothing but a config map in it? Can you elaborate a little on what you were thinking?
Yeah, sure. So there are two ways that I think you could do this as alternates. One would be now just to be clear, the cluster ID that you want to send in the context is like a string value, right?
Is a what?
It's just a string value. And actually, since I'm asking, maybe could you give an example of the value that you want to send for the cluster ID?
Yeah, you're right. It is just basically a string. I believe we're going to populate it with a UUID though.
Okay. So one option would be to just add I'm sorry, I hate the use of the word just in these things because it tends to discount parts, like portions of effort required, but there are two alternate ways that we can do this that carry a little less risk for the future. One would be to add a CLI flag to the controller that sets the value of the cluster ID. And another one would be to set the namespace and name of a config map to read the value from. And in the second case, the controller would make a call to read that config map from the main Kubernetes API server, and and read the value and then know what to send. And I guess there's also a third route that we could go, which would be to put an annotation on the cluster service broker resource that you could say, send this for cluster ID. My concern with the API resource is that it has unusual semantics, and I have never felt comfortable with those semantics, and I would really prefer not to add them to a beta API. That's it for me.
Okay, just to poke a little bit on your. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Doug, let me just real quick. What I'm hearing are one implemented option and at least two, maybe three other options. I think it would probably be good to have these written up in some kind of concise summarizations. I know we've had some discussions on them. I think I heard they were also discussed a bit at the face-to-face, but I've never seen them in one place or even in three places, like written down. I think it'd be good to have that and then have kind of a discussion around making the decision on exactly what we're going to do. That's it for me. Go ahead, Doug.
I just wanted to make sure I understood your, I think it was your second option there, Paul, where you said create a config map. I think you said anyway, create a config map in the main Kubernetes data store. If we head down that path, is that problematic at all? And the reason I'm asking is because I think when we first started talking about this a long, long time ago, the concern about storing our resources storing our resources as third-party resources or CRDs was always an option. But I think as of recently, that option is no longer a useful one. I'm sorry. That's not no longer a requirement.
I think I was not clear enough. So
Okay.
what I specifically meant was not to make a new API resource. It would be to store the value of the cluster ID that you want to send in an instance of the config map resource from the Kubernetes API, and configure the controller with the namespace and name of that config map. And then the controller on startup would make a call to the API server to read that particular config map and pull the value out of it. Does that make sense?
Right. I think that's the same thing as what I was saying. It's just back in the time when the service catalog controller wasn't going to access the main wasn't going to access the main Kubernetes API server for our resources, right? Back when we were going to use third-party resources or CRDs, that was going to be a problem, right?
So I think the problem with third-party resources was like the specifics that were problematic for us were the numerous bugs in the implementation of TPR. CRD has addressed some of those, but and actually, just for the record, what we're talking about here was the concept of using third-party resource or custom resource definitions as a backing store instead of an etcd for the service catalog API server. CRDs have fixed a lot of things about the implementation of third-party resources, but they do not support multiple versions, which is probably the chief thing that still makes them not a great choice to store resource data from another API in. I don't think that's a concern for this. And in fact, we already read the namespace UID from the main API server. So I don't think it's a concern. I'd much rather like read a value from a config map than add an API, a new API resource, personally.
Okay,
Does that
I think so. Let me ask a question of Aaron then, because I think you guys may, at one point in time, had use cases where you did not want to use the same etcd as core Kubernetes. Is accessing core Kubernetes etcd for this bit of information a concern to anybody?
I'm kind of unclear what the access mechanism has to do with the way that we're storing a cluster ID.
Well,
yeah,
maybe I'm misunderstanding, but my understanding was that there were some use cases where people wanted to keep the main etcd for core Kubernetes completely separate from service catalog resources. So they may actually have two separate etcds, one for core kube, one for service catalog. And I think, Paul, what you're suggesting is that may be true, but for this particular cluster ID resource, go ahead and put that not into the service catalog etcd, but into core Kubernetes etcd. I was wondering if that's a concern for anybody.
Yeah, so let me put it this way. When it comes to like the concept of putting some configuration data for service catalog into config map, like I just look at service catalog like in that facet, just like it's another app deployed on Kubernetes. So like we could put this data into a config map in the same namespace as the service catalog API server and controller run, and you can modify the pod spec for the controller to inject it as a CLI property if we don't want to add wiring into the controller itself, which might be a better idea, to just use a CLI flag for the actual value that you want to send, and then inject that to the CLI options in the pod spec, which you can do if it comes from a config map. But does that make sense, Doug?
I think so. I need to kind of process it, but I'm also going to probably punt this over to Morgan right now, since Morgan, obviously, since you wrote the code, you're more familiar with it. I'd like to get your opinion on what Paul is suggesting.
It sounds like one of the other suggestions made by somebody else. I'd have to watch whatever he said a couple of times to write it down, but it sounds like something we considered, and nobody else had an opinion, so I did this.
Well, so I don't think we discussed the results of these other conversations as a group. I don't seem to recall it.
I think he meant with the other SIGs that he talked to.
Yeah, that's what all I meant.
Okay. Well, maybe for the next call, or maybe in the issue itself, since we're probably not going to meet again for a little bit of time, maybe, Morgan, you could go back and revisit or try to refresh your memory about if anything was said about that particular option, or maybe find the point or two where that might have been discussed, so maybe Paul can read up on that, or we can all read up on it and refresh our memories. And maybe we can try to hash through this offline, and then if we don't come to a resolution, we can talk about it again on the next call.
I've got what I wrote down earlier in the document I posted. I have to figure out what Paul said and write it down, or he can write it down himself. But
okay, because I'd like to explore Paul's option just to see whether it's makes more sense, or it doesn't make sense based upon everything that you've learned during this entire exercise. But I think it is worthy at least having the discussion and look at all the options.
super duper.
Okay. Anyway, that was it for me. I just wanted to try to see if we could resolve Paul's. Apparently, we need to do more investigation. So I think that's it for this topic, Aaron.
I think the use case is valid for the record. And people are starting to ask me about how does service catalog relate to things in other clusters. So I think this is a timely discussion. We'll figure out the right way to do it.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Can people still hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I had some technical issues. So the last thing on the agenda is when the next call is. This is from you, Doug. Do you want to just go over it real quick?
Yeah, I'm hoping people don't want to meet again December 25th, and the week after that is January 1st, I believe. So hopefully people will be off having fun. I was suggesting maybe the next call should be January 8th.
I like that idea.
Anyone want to meet before the 8th? Okay. Got Scott. So I would suggest, I think if people want to meet, organize it. I'm not going to be able to be there, so find someone else to run it. I'll be back on the 8th. All right.
All right. I will also be back on the 8th. Anybody that wants to meet before then, totally welcome. I hope you get good things done and we come back to all problems solved.
All right. With that, I will see everyone on the 8th, and have a good holiday / New Year / everything else. See you, everybody.
Bye.
See you, everybody. Thanks for everything this year. Look forward to 2018.